So how are erythrocytes made? They are produced in the red bone marrow that is found in the flat and irregular bones of the axial skeleton. The process for creating erythrocytes is referred to as erythropoiesis. This process produces about 1 ounce of new blood per day, which contains roughly 100 billion new erythrocytes. That is equivalent to approximately 2 million new erythrocytes each second. So the entire process of hematopoiesis takes approximately 15 days. Cells that are called hematopoietic stem cells will create all of the formed elements, not just the erythrocytes. So we will see these cells again when we review the leukocyte production. Some of these cells will receive signals to commit to becoming an erythrocyte, and they will begin to mature. So let's examine some of these steps that occurs during the development of red blood cells. So the committed cells will first become basophilic erythroblasts, which are going to function to produce lots of ribosomes. So why are the ribosomes important for this cell? So recall that ribosomes produce proteins. So in this case, the proteins that are produced by those ribosomes are hemoglobin proteins. These cells also undergo lots of mitosis, so that is, they make lots of copies of themselves, because we find that mature red blood cells are unable to do that. So this is the point at which these cells will multiply and create more of themselves. So later we will see these cells becoming orthochromatic erythroblasts. The orthochromatic erythroblast will eject the nucleus as well as the majority of the organelles in order to make room for the hemoglobin that's accumulating within those cells. The term orthochromatic means correct color, and so this is where the cell will start to take on a red color because we see that hemoglobin is starting to accumulate. So once the organelles are ejected, the cell is referred to as a reticulocyte, and reticulocyte counts are a good measure of erythrocyte production, since directly measuring erythrocyte production is quite difficult. So the higher number of erythrocytes that we see circulating in the bloodstream generally means that erythropoiesis is occurring at a more rapid pace. So from there, the reticulocytes will then become the erythrocytes. So erythropoiesis occurs in the red bone marrow of flat and irregular bones, so like the cranial bones, the facial bones, the ribs, the vertebrae, and the hip bones. So if our body produces too few erythrocytes, this leads to a condition called hypoxia, which refers to low oxygen levels or low concentrations of oxygen within the body or within the tissues. So on the other hand, if there are too many erythrocytes, this makes the blood too viscous, meaning that the heart would have to work harder in order to move that blood. So therefore, there has to be a balance between too few erythrocytes and too many erythrocytes. So just enough erythrocytes must be produced to keep up with the ones that are destroyed as a result of regular wear and tear. So recall that red blood cells don't have a nucleus, and one consequence of that property is that they are unable to repair themselves in the event that they become damaged, and they are also unable to undergo mitosis. So what erythrocytes will tend to do is they will circulate in the bloodstream until they disintegrate. So proper production of erythrocytes is going to depend on dietary intake of the proper nutrients as well as hormonal controls. So let's take a moment and examine both of these. So first let's examine the dietary requirements. So nutrients such as amino acids, lipids, and carbohydrates are needed for building any cell, including erythrocytes. So those are pretty typical nutrients that we would see as a requirement. We also would require vitamin B12 as well as folic acid because both of these are critical in DNA synthesis, which is what's happening during mitosis. We saw that mitosis occurs in the basophilic erythroblasts. And of course we also have iron, and iron is an important nutrient because it is what the oxygen binds to on hemoglobin. So roughly 65% of the body's iron is found within hemoglobin. Things like red meats, kale, and spinach, which are dark leafy green vegetables, are excellent nutritional sources for iron. So the kidney is an organ that produces a hormone, which is called erythropoietin, or EPO, which regulates erythrocyte production. So normally the kidney releases a small amount of EPO in order to maintain baseline erythrocyte production in the red marrow. So erythropoietin specifically targets the red marrow and stimulates it to produce the erythrocytes. In the event of hypoxia, which is inadequate oxygen delivery to the kidneys as well as other body tissues, the kidney will increase its production and release of erythropoietin. So note that hypoxia could be caused by decreased levels of red blood cells in the bloodstream, decreased amounts of hemoglobin in those red blood cells, or by decreased oxygen availability. The increased EPO secretion by the kidney results from all of these conditions, which helps to explain why those who live at high altitudes tend to have more red blood cells and higher hematocrits, because the low atmospheric pressure at high altitudes makes it difficult for oxygen to diffuse into the bloodstream. So another hormonal control of erythrocyte production is the hormone testosterone. So it also stimulates the red marrow to produce erythrocytes, among other things. So this helps to explain why males have a higher average hematocrit than females do. So when the body tissues are not receiving proper amounts of oxygen, they start to produce a substance called hypoxia-inducing factor, which here we'll just refer to as HIF. So HIF is broken down by oxygen-dependent enzymes within the kidney. So that is, if oxygen delivery to the kidney is low, those enzymes within the kidney are unable to break down the HIF quickly enough. And we see that when HIF accumulates, that is kind of the signal for the kidney to increase its production and release of EPO. So as mentioned previously, reduced red blood cell numbers, low hemoglobin quantity within those red blood cells, or reduced oxygen availability as a result of local atmospheric conditions are all conditions which would or could result in low oxygen concentrations or low oxygen delivery to the tissues, and specifically to the kidney, where things like EPO are produced and released in order to control the synthesis of new red blood cells.